Can mind control happen in our dreams? Today, we're going to be talking about prophetic dreams and exploring whether or not they're a form of mind control. So if you've ever wondered why you've had a prophetic dream, and if that means that something is really going to happen, you're going to want to stick around for the entirety of this episode, because we're going to be talking about everything from the gateway tapes to the Tavistock Institute, mall world, and the government's interest in our dreams, plus the future of lucid dreaming and dream recording. So let's get into it. First of all, I think an important place that we could start is understanding that we as humans exist in a world with millions and billions of other people. And there is something that many great minds have talked about, this idea of a quantum field or a collective field. Dr. Greer, who I believe is a brilliant mind of our time, who is very knowledgeable about the disclosure movement, he also talks about meditation a lot, and he talks about how when we meditate, we access this collective quantum field. The CIA's assessment of the gateway tapes, or the analysis and assessment of the gateway tapes in the 1980s, which were studying Robert Monroe's work, and the gateway tapes also called the universe holographic. So essentially they were saying something along the lines of, if you imagine a strip of film, you can see different frames of the story happening, but within every single frame there exists a holograph that can't be destroyed. We can also see this come up in popular literature, like the book called The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot, essentially the same idea. And then we have other authors like Vadim Zeland, who wrote Reality Transurfing, where he talks about how we live in a multiverse and that it is our emotions that align us to specific timelines with specific outcomes. Bashar is another one of my favorite teachers who talks about the multiverse theory and this concept of some kind of collective field. So essentially, from Bashar's perspective, we are shifting reality billions of times a second, similar to the idea of the movie film strip, where there's different screens that are still shots, and every moment we're shifting between different films and different movies. So my philosophy has always been, not that I believe that there is one infinite truth. I believe that multiple things can be true for different people at the same time. I believe we saw this in real life when we were in the middle of the pandemic, for example. And I think that 2020, obviously there's been separation and discord before then, but you really saw a split in 2020 where people had really strong beliefs. Politics started becoming really intense ever since Trump entered the picture. And you had essentially what seemed like two groups of people. On one hand, you had people who were like, this whole thing is a psyop, it's planned. I don't know anyone who's passed away from this. It's wild how they're making everybody get the jab, and they never experienced anyone passing away from it. And a lot of those very same people also got time off of work, and then they were making like $900 a week to do nothing in unemployment money. Like, I can't even tell you how many people who had never made that much money in their life, but then the pandemic happened, and all of a sudden now they're making all this money because they got called off work. And I myself had a crazy experience, or I just got lucky, I guess, because I was working at a restaurant at the time, but right around the time of the pandemic, the restaurant, I hadn't worked there long enough. And since I'd always been a contract worker, I wasn't one of the people who was forced to go back to the restaurant, but the people who had been in the industry for years, or that was their full-time job and they weren't a contract worker, they had to go back to the restaurant and work because they were considered a essential employee, I believe. And that's when the restaurants were doing like carry out. And then they were, instead of making the money you make as a server, they were making like minimum wage. So I was really thankful that I didn't have to do that, because that was, even I remember myself being full of fear back then, the pandemic being a huge start to my own spiritual awakening. I didn't know what was going on, and I was terrified just like everybody else, like, oh my gosh, this virus is going to wipe us all out. I'm so glad I don't have to go out and be in public. But my point is that there was that one group of people, a lot of the people that I knew personally who were living it up during the pandemic, essentially, like they weren't affected by it, even though they were forced to be on lockdown. They didn't have to get the thing if they didn't want to. They were fine on money, and most of them did something amazing with their stimulus money. They either invested in themselves to learn something new, they put it away in savings for a rainy day, but they were thriving during that period. And then you had people who were completely devastated by this awful thing that happened to us. So they were either forced to get the thing and forced to show up to work, watched people passing away left and right, lost loved ones from it, just really bad experiences. And I'm not saying for one second that anyone brought this upon themselves, but I will say from my own observations, a lot of the people who weren't completely wrecked by the situation, they were already people who I would never in a million years call an NPC or somebody who doesn't think for themselves. It seems to be, again, my observation, maybe it was different where you were, but my observation was that a lot of these people who had the worst experiences were the ones who were really easy to fall victim to fear. So those who really cared about what other people thought of them, those who were really concerned about, like I said, what other people thought of them, those who fell into fear really easily, those who did not take personal accountability for their lives, those who were extremely critical and judgmental of others, seemed to have it bad. So what this taught me, what this showed me, is that there's something to this idea that our own personal vibration, how we see the world, how our own mind operates, can absolutely play a role in the kind of reality and experiences in that reality that we attract. So I've absolutely been a believer ever since then that I was creating my own reality. And I'll never forget that around the time of the pandemic, I started seeing a lot of law of attraction stuff pop up in my universe. And I was always interested in this idea of the law of attraction because I had read The Secret years prior. And I remember I had been listening to Abraham Hicks a lot. And Abraham Hicks isn't everybody's cup of tea. Even for me, sometimes it's just like, you got to be in the mood for it, and you got to be able to have that mindset where it's like, take what you want and leave the rest. You don't have to agree with every single thing that a person or entity teaches to get value from it. So that's kind of how I looked at it, and I listened to their content a lot. And because I was really brainwashing myself with law of attraction content, and then also practicing, putting into action scripting exercises, which is essentially journaling before bed every night about the type of universe I'm trying to create, the type of reality I want to create. Not only that, but also, who is Alex? Who do I want to be? And I remember at the time I had been struggling with my self-image, and I'd also been struggling with a relationship where I felt like I just felt like I liked him more than he liked me or something, and there's a lot of insecurities there. So, I fell on the law of attraction bandwagon that a lot of people do, where it's like, oh, just, manifest or script the people to be like how you want them to be, and that's how you bring out the best from people around you. And I was like, that's crazy, but I did it anyways. I tried it, and I remember scripting before bed every night, like, well, because my mind has always gone so quickly to negative. It's always jumping to the worst case scenario. It was always like, somebody's going to cheat on me, somebody's going to hurt me. And that, in me, came from trauma and me having, being in a state of hypervigilance all the time, me suffering from anxiety, me thinking that I knew better. So I was always afraid that the other shoe was going to drop. So my mind was used to telling the same story about people over and over again. So somebody could, do something one time. A normal, healthy person might be able to look at that thing and say, oh, they just had a bad day. That's not going to happen every day. Somebody who is hypervigilant, who suffered from a lot of trauma, might see one bad behavior in a person, and now all of a sudden it changes every good memory you've ever had of that person. All of a sudden they go from somebody who's this angel on a pedestal to somebody who can't be trusted, to somebody who's going to hurt them. And it's so black and white. So I was one of those people who had that black and white thinking. But when I was doing the scripting exercises and the law of attraction exercises, it was teaching me that my thoughts are extremely powerful. And I was committed to this exercise. I wasn't just doing it one time and not doing it, because it doesn't make sense to me if you're really trying to change something that you would try it one time and give up so easily. I'm not a quitter, so I put in the work to really experiment with the stuff and see if it worked. And to my surprise, all the things that I was writing down about how I wanted this person to behave and the type of behavior I wanted to attract from them actually came true. And I was like in shock. Even some things that absolutely should not have come true, and I wish I could share it on this channel, but to protect that person's identity, I will not. But anyways, all that to say that those exercises are what ultimately taught me the power of my thoughts. So why does this matter? We're going to get to that point here very soon. But I think what I'm trying to say is that our beliefs are the driving factor for what we experience in our life. So how does that relate to dreams? First of all, I think it is worth noting that the mind has been exposed to things since the second we were born. And it's all seems to come down to what the mind is, how the mind operates. I think especially for anyone who is self-reflective, somebody who practices meditation, and somebody who has a deep relationship with their creator or their own sense of spirituality, you probably understand that you have an ego and then you have your higher self. And if you're well practiced in meditation and being able to sit still with yourself, you also have a pretty good understanding of when the ego and the anxiety are talking versus when is the higher self guidance coming through. And if you don't know, a good rule of thumb to be able to figure out who and what is speaking is that the ego is loud and anxious. The ego goes fast, and the higher mind is more slow, calming influence. It's not like chitter chatter. Sometimes it can be if you are getting a lot of information that's coming through at once. But the other thing is that higher guidance only comes when you're in states to receive it. So if you think about brainwaves, this is such a wonderful place to start. And this is why the government has been so interested in studying consciousness and studying our dream states. Stick around for this, because we're going to talk about some government studies here in a minute, but I want to finish this idea about brainwave states, because when we are born into this world between 0 and 3, we are operating primarily in delta, which is like a deep sleep. So you're able to be programmed. And if I'm not mistaken, those brain waves are a lot slower or larger. And then we move up from 3 to 6 to theta, which is not so deep as delta, but it's still states where you can be programmed. So it's a state of programming the subconscious mind. And then from 7 to 12, we're primarily in alpha, which is a lightly programmable state. And then usually by the time we're 12, we switch to beta. So when we get into those higher, those beta and alpha brainwaves, again, if I'm not mistaken, they're a lot quicker. So there's more, the waves are shorter and bigger, I guess. Versus if you were to look at the brain waves of somebody in a more peaceful state of mind, it's kind of like a slow wave like that. So that is why when people who claim to channel entities and spirit guides and psychic mediums put themselves in a state of meditation, and that's when they're able to connect to those forces. So rather than the human mind, the average human mind, which is usually an alpha or probably beta, which is problem solving, so it's like anxiety mode, you're always going. If you are over identifying with that voice of anxiety and you don't practice any kind of, you don't have any kind of tools for even trying to understand your own brainwaves, if you're afraid to sit alone with yourself and meditate or do any kind of creative things, it's likely that you're spending more time in those problem-solving states. So how do you know if you're in this state? Well, probably anxious, probably hypervigilant, probably suffer from depression or anxiety or a multitude of mental health stuff. But primarily it's feelings of problem solving. So you're going to be in states of fear, of frustration, of anger, of trying to make sure that the other shoe doesn't drop. So trying to control things, versus when you're in those delta or theta, and I think gamma is supposed to be the flow state. So I'm not sure if that means that the brain waves are also slow and like wide, or if it is even higher than the alpha and beta. So feel free to correct me. I'm just drawing from memory right now. But what I'm trying to say is, when you're in those states that you are when you're sleeping, or when you're in a state of meditation, that's when people tend to have those messages from their spirit guides. Or a lot of people who claim to channel, they wake up around 3, 4, or 5 in the morning when your brain is naturally in that brainwave state. So you're able to connect. So if we share this holographic field, this collective energy field with other entities or disembodied spirits or archons or angels and demons, they are communicating with us all the time. In a way, our mind is a vessel. Not only do we have our own soul's essence inside there, but we can pick up on the thought forms, the energy field, and things that are in the collective unconscious at the same time. So that's why it's important for us to be able to realize, for us to do things like this where you're grounding in nature. So I'm in my own energy field right now. I'm doing something grounding. I've got the sun beating down on me. It's so hot out here, I gotta take this off. I've got green trees around me, which are very, have a very calming effect on the heart. But I'm grounding in nature, and then I'm walking, which is good for the body too. But there's other ways to get into these meditative brainwave states, like doing something creative or yoga or even working out can be helpful for putting yourself in some kind of meditative state. So basically you're putting yourself in a state of increased focus where you're focusing on something intently. And if you're not, that's usually when the monkey mind starts to activate, right? So my point is, when we're more likely to receive those higher insights, higher frequency guidance when we're in those states of meditation. And other authors talk about this too, which is so important to bring up, because you've got Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. Like I'm sure you've heard of that book title, especially if you're in the spirituality niche or self-help and development. That's a book that a lot of people say that they read. And that book specifically talks about millionaires and how they're able to grab ideas from this collective thought field. So we've talked about how the individual can receive thoughts in their waking state. Now I want to talk about dream states. But what is of interest to me in this video is the government's interest in brainwave states. So again, if you watch my channel, I've checked out my analytics. Most of you were born in the 80s and 90s, and I also have people born in the 50s and 60s, and then a little younger than the 90s, so like early 2000s. So most of us watching this video right now are likely not born before the 50s. And now when we go back into history about what was going on in that time, in 1947, I believe it was 1947, after World War II, or around World War II, we've got the creation of the CIA. We've got, which I believe came from some kind of like National Security Act or something. Is that the creation of the CIA? I know it was in the 40s. And then we have Also, the Tavistock Institute, which I believe was also formed around that time. So you may have heard Tavistock Institute mentioned, especially when it comes to the GATE program or Gifted and Talented program. Tavistock Institute comes up in conversations when we're talking about social engineering. Something else that is very interesting about the Tavistock Institute is that in the 80s, they were studying social dreaming. So what is social dreaming? Social dreaming was when they had groups of people, which they referred to as a matrix, which I think is very interesting. They referred to this group of people as a matrix. So there could have been, a matrix of people that worked in healthcare, for example, or maybe the matrix of people were a part of the same family or they were part of the same social group. But their interest was in sharing their personal dreams, but rather than looking for unique meaning in the dreams, they were trying to find unique meanings and how that was relevant for the subconscious, or for the collective subconscious. So what it was essentially the study of figuring out when people share similar dreams. So even if they're not in the same dream, but they're sharing themes in their dreams, what does that say about the subconscious field? So this also reminds me of Carl Jung. He also believed that we had a collective field where essentially everything exists. And then if we talk about quantum physics, this is an idea that is also discussed in quantum physics and the Double Slit Experiment. So essentially saying that when there's two observers, they can be observing the same particle, but that particle acted differently when each individual observed it. And that experiment essentially showed scientists that everything exists in the quantum field as a possibility until it collapses into an experience, which only happens when it has an observer. So this is important to talk about because hopefully if you're following along still, you're understanding that there are so many different ways of essentially talking about the same subject. So that's why I love getting information from a variety of sources, because when you get your information from a variety of sources, you start to see the natural thread that connects it all. So all that to say, I absolutely believe in the collective unconscious. So now let's go back and continue talking about the government, 1940s, CIA, and Tavistock Institute, and their interest in social engineering. And it is worth noting that they were funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. So Rockefeller is also mentioned in Fritz Springmeier and Cisco Wheeler's work about the Illuminati formula. And then Fritz Springmeier also wrote a book in the 90s about the 13 Illuminati bloodlines. And a lot of people on my channel have also mentioned the Rockefellers have been involved in the education system. Okay, so now this is where it gets interesting. So the 1940s, all that stuff's going on. Then we have in the 50s and 60s, 70s, we've got Robert Monroe, who's experimenting in the astral realm on his own consciousness. We also have other countries experimenting with psychic spies during the Cold War. We've got Russian physicist who created something called the Kosyrev mirror, and it was essentially, or Kosyrev mirror or Kosyrev egg, I think it was a mirror, but essentially this device that a psychic would sit in and they could interact with creatures from other dimensions and other entities. So we also have projects, private silent projects that the CIA was allegedly involved with, like Project Looking Glass, which is the same idea. They had some kind of contraption. I want to say it was with copper and quartz crystals or something, where somebody sat in the middle and used their consciousness to predict the outcome of different timelines. So you've got the government's interest in controlling outlines, but it was always in these very esoteric, dreamlike states. And they also took an interest in Robert Monroe's work because China and Russia already had psychic spies and children. The United States was of course interested with keeping up with that. So they became interested in Monroe's work in the 80s. And that's where we get into the GATE program. A lot of kids who were pulled out of class for hearing tests that remember listening to the gateway tapes that have been activated recently by hearing the tone of the gateway tapes played and by hearing Robert Monroe's voice. So whether or not you were in the gifted program or you're just a student who remembers hearing them, I have not found specific research that says, yes, for sure, we all listened to the gateway tapes, or that it was only for gifted kids, or that they were even played at all, because there is something called schema where your brain can kind of make fake memories if it's of something similar. And it is possible that there were other educators and people at the time who were inspired by Monroe's work. So they also made tapes for meditation and hearing tests that sounded an awful lot like the gateway tapes, but were not. But I have so many people from my channel who specifically remember listening to them. So I think it's worth noting that a lot of people remember hearing the gateway tapes. So gateway tapes were about the exploration of consciousness. The CIA had an interest in remote viewing, and also that is what the Monroe Institute was all about too. And I also noticed, you may have noticed too, that a lot of big creators are making their way to the Robert Monroe Institute here lately online and sharing about their experiences. I saw one girl that said she was able to bend a spoon with her mind or something. And then there's like a whole program I think that you can take if you go there, probably like $2,000 or something, and you stay there and do all their practices and probably get hooked up to a machine. They like read your brainwaves. I don't really know. That's what I think I remember somebody saying. But it's given me Stranger Things vibes. And since we're on the subject of governments and military projects, then we also have to talk about how the Department of Defense has been in bed with Hollywood for a long time. CIA allegedly has infiltrated into Hollywood, so you've got your honeypots like Marilyn Monroe. Now they're saying Anna Nicole Smith was a honeypot, and they're saying Courtney Love is coming out saying that she was experimented on as a kid and mind controlled as well. So you've got all these famous people who have been allegedly used as mind control slaves or beta programming, and also predictive programming in general that comes from Hollywood. So let's again backtrack to the 1940s, before most of us were born, when the Roswell crash was, and where we started seeing movies about space, movies about aliens, the creation of NASA. Not to mention the guy who created NASA had relations with Aleister Crowley, and they were doing some kind of moonchild rituals, which, again, side note, this is just something worth mentioning in the web of all things Gate and Dream World, and the things that we talk about on my channel. And I think what's interesting about moon children is that, again, just a personal observation, a lot of people I know who seem to have natural psychic gifts they're born during a new moon, which means that they've got their sun and their moon in the same astrological sign, which brings coherence to the mind and the will and the unconscious mind. So I think that is one example of what moon children were, and I'm sure they used it in some other way because they were allegedly doing rituals during the moon children, trying to have entities be born into those children. So I don't know if that has anything to do with if your sun and moon, your natal sun and moon in astrology have the same sign or not. Again, just a side note, just a simple observation that I've noticed, that seems to be one of many signs of somebody having psychic abilities that you can find in someone's birth chart. So anyways, back to Hollywood and predictive programming, all the stuff about aliens, all right? And now we're also making the correlation that there's been an awful lot of interest in the government who have been studying the unconscious realm, the dream states. Not to mention that they hired a bunch of psychics and witches and warlocks, I think it was in the 70s, when they had an interest in training psychic soldiers and remote viewing and all that. And then let's get into the gateway tapes again, because the gateway tapes was about brainwave entrainment. So essentially, it was training people. When you use the tapes consistently, you can train yourself to have an out-of-body experience. and you can essentially transport yourself or have these lucid type experiences where you also can connect with other entities. So whether those are aliens, demons, I don't really know. People probably have different opinions on that. But the point is that that's what the gateway tapes do, but you're supposed to use them slowly. So you use the same tapes for weeks on end, I believe, and then you're not supposed to shift too fast to the next focus level because that's a different brainwave state. And when you do, it can cause disorientation, it can cause emotional dysregulation, it can cause hypervigilance, and a lot of negative experiences to happen. So my question was, what was the effect of brainwave entrainment on children? And again, I could not find documented articles about this, but it was speculated that this kind of effect on children under 7, when your brain waves are already in those theta brainwaves, so you're already in states of meditation, because it's being synthetically induced, you're being emotionally dysregulated because it's going against your natural cycles as a human. So what can that create? It either creates chronic daydreamers and disassociators. In other words, somebody who's always in a dreamlike state, who's daydreaming all the time. And on the negative level, maybe you grow up as an adult who's like insanely obsessed with, like I was, like this, my daydreaming tendency to daydream turned me into a person who had an unhealthy fixation on finding the one and idolizing men who had toxic traits that weren't good for me to be around, because I was trying to, daydreaming about this perfect future that I would have with them. So that was me when I was in lower states of consciousness. I didn't really understand boundaries or my own energy field or how to wake up to my own psychic abilities and whatnot. So it was like I was very easily controlled by these things. So that's one negative way it can manifest. But people who can daydream and dissociate can also be used as assets by our own government, or discarded because they can't be controlled. So maybe you ended up working for some kind of organization where you ended up becoming a psychic spy for somebody, or maybe you were discarded after these programs allegedly experimented on us, and your dissociative nature now wanted to dissociate through mind-altering substances like psychedelics and alcohol and MJ. So because and again, not saying it's absolutely because of the gateway tapes, I'm just saying there's a lot of people that remember hearing them as hearing tests to test for gifted and talented programs. And there's also speculation out there that this could have also been psychic screening, when they had an interest in finding psychic spies and grooming them to work for intelligence agencies, either now because they've been able to hack into the dream states, and there's evidence coming up now, literally from Blair White's channel. She had Harvard UFO attorney Danny Sheehan on, and in that episode he was talking about how Northrop Grumman had a base for GATE kids where they were telepathically piloting UFOs. And I will also say, this is just anecdotal, but the people who watch my channel, when I first started talking about GATE, I would get comments like that a lot. Like people, even before this stuff came out more in the open, I would get people that would share their experiences and say they remembered telepathically flying UFOs. So you're starting to see how all these things keep connecting. So it makes you wonder, were they screening kids for psychic abilities? Is that what the hearing tests were about? Did they even know the long-term effects of brainwave entrainment? Is that why so many of us ended up with addiction or with obsessive compulsive personalities? Is that why so many of us are neurodivergent? Were we groomed and created to be this way, whether by accident or consciously? I don't know. A lot of questions. But the other interesting thing, while we're on the subject of psychic abilities and dreams, which many GATE kids also had, they also remember psychic abilities. So again, whether or not it was an effect of listening to the gateway tapes, which were trying to induce out-of-body experiences, or if this is a natural ability that children have. They could fly, they could astral travel, they could float outside of their bodies, they had predictive dreams and prophetic dreams that ended up coming true. So whether or not that was induced or something that happened naturally, there's also this strange phenomenon that's happening today, and that is the phenomenon of mall world. So if you're not familiar with what mall world is something that became popularized on TikTok. I don't know who the first person who started talking about it was, but I've seen maps that people have drawn of it, and essentially mall world is a dream place that a lot of people remember seeing in their dreams. It has a mall, it has an airport, parking garage, hospitals, an impending tsunami in the distance, gross bathrooms, and a lot of people feel like when they go here, there's agents chasing them or entities chasing them, or they're just trying to escape. So, is this a literal place that people are visiting in their dream? Is this a liminal space, like a video game? You know, not the kind of like the back rooms, right? Or is it all symbolic? Is it symbolic? Is it like the social dreaming of the Tavistock Institute that we talked about, where there is this collective field and there are themes in the collective field? So when your personal emotional state is at the vibrational frequency to be in this realm, to make yourself a vibrational match to it, that's when you see those things in your dream. So just off the top of my head, again, using simple observations, feeling people out, you know, the internet is a crazy place. You're going to come across people who actually make some sense, and you're like, all right, that guy's cool, that girl's cool. And then you're going to see people who are, you know, batshit crazy. So I've seen both when it comes to the topic of mall world. I'm like, yeah, no wonder you're going there every night. You sound crazy, and you're, you know, clearly you're also kind of like talking about their mental health issues in the same sentence. So it's clear to me as the observer that it makes logical sense to me why they're ending up there and they're having those feelings where they're, you know, get really obsessive about drawing the details of mall world, because dreams are so symbolic. And if we're just looking at the symbolism of mall world, dreams about a parking garage. Think about what a parking garage is. You're stuck there, you're parked, which means you're not taking off. Your life is on pause in some way. If there's a nasty bathroom that you don't want to use, it means you're holding in your emotions and you're not eliminating waste. So you're holding on to emotions like fear, like shame, like guilt, embarrassment. If you are in a public bathroom and people are watching you, you're afraid of being publicly shamed or ridiculed. If you are seeing a bunch of airplanes take off, but you're left behind, you're seeing a lot of different ideas take off in flight, but yours has not. If you're in a hospital, hospitals can, you know, be traumatic for a lot of people too. Not only are they places for healing, but they're also a place for trauma. And then of course, the most in-your-face symbol of all, the impending tsunami, the wave. Water represents emotion. So when there's a tsunami literally coming for you, that's like symbolically being overwhelmed by your emotions. So not saying, you know, just because you've had these dreams, you're crazy or something like that. Not at all. I'm just saying it's important to have discernment why a lot of people are seeing these places. We have to look at what's going on inside of us. So are we somehow a vibrational match to those spaces? What, you know, that's why dreams are supposed to inquire, they're supposed to inspire self-reflection. So they're not necessarily something that happened they're supposed to like tell the whole world about, like, I had a prophetic dream, the world's gonna explode, you'll thank me later. No, that dream is coming up because there's something in you that was a match to it. And there can be a number of reasons why this happens. So let's get into that. First of all, something that seems to be happening for a lot of people, not just the mall world stuff, which of course you can, you know, if you find yourself in those worlds at night, ask yourself, like, why can't I escape? Why do I always feel like somebody's chasing me? Do I have unresolved trauma I'm not dealing with? Do I feel like I'm not living up to my full potential? Do I have an addiction that I'm not dealing with? Am I trying to self-medicate or run away from something? Why do I have this impending feeling of doom in my waking life? But another thing that seems to be popular that I hear a lot of people talking about are prophetic dreams about the end of the world or nuclear instances, or alien invasions, or an array of other doomsday type dreams. And these are the ones that I have a hard time getting behind, because usually the people sharing about them are like, I had a prophetic dream, there's going to be an event that happens, and such and such is going to happen. And when the person who is delivering the information is full of fear, it doesn't always seem like a reliable source. And I'm not saying that, because I feel like I do also know people who have had experiences, like where they were able to predict something like 9/11, or they saw visions of that. So I don't want to discount anybody's experience, but I think rather than running to the public and scaring other people, that if you're blessed to have these visions, that it's your responsibility to sit with it and ask yourself, what is it trying to tell you? I don't think that you're here to spread fear. Why would you share a problem with people that doesn't have a solution? So if I'm having a prophetic dream about some kind of crash or something that is going to happen, I can look at it in a few ways. So maybe it's literally a warning. So it's like the movie Final Destination, where he has the dream about the plane crash, and before he gets on the plane, he decides not to get on it because he saw the crash and how everybody would pass away when they were on that plane. So one thing to consider is that this might be a warning of some sort, so that you saw, because something in your vibration, something in your emotional vicinity that's making you a match to these dreams is potentially putting you in a line of fire where something negative could happen. So again, it would be an opportunity to self-reflect and say, do I have any people or instances in my life where it's kind of pushing me down the wrong path? I've got habits that are bad. I've got a job I don't like. I got negative people in my vicinity. Perhaps the dream is a warning that is telling you, if I'm dreaming of this, this is showing me what I'm aligning myself to with my energy field. Because if I'm in a more positive state of mind, and I hate to make it sound like toxic positivity, because it's not like that at all. It's about recognizing why your negative emotions are coming up and then not living there, but like transmuting them and alchemizing them. So it's not to say that just, if you're in a high vibe all the time, that you don't have those lower level emotions. No, you have them and you honor them. You don't try to ignore them and act like they don't exist, but you also don't stay in them, and you don't project them on other people, and you don't trauma dump, and you don't put other people in fear because you're feeling crappy. And that's what seems to be happening with a lot of people who are in this category of like, I have prophetic dreams, and these people that make TikTok accounts and Facebook accounts, and they get these large followings because they're telling everybody there's a prophetic dream, I saw 2 moons, the rapture is coming, blah, blah, blah. And then the people who are the mind-controlled sheep who aren't, and sorry if this is generalization, but this is again just an observation. This is not everybody, but this is a lot of the channels I notice. People who are more like mind-controlled sheep, they need something to believe in, something to guide them, something to tell them what to do, because they haven't figured out how to be their own sovereign being yet. So when we're not taking personal accountability for ourselves and our lives, that's when we're victim. That's when it's easy for us to fall victim to, being a sheep that is following somebody else's wacky narrative. And it just so happens that sometimes even the sheep end up in the place where they're guiding other sheep. So they're still a sheep that's being controlled by something else, but I would ask, what are they being controlled by? So it all comes back down to using your discernment about who you're following and about why you think you're having these dreams in the first place. Like why is it telling you? What is unique about you that is making you a match to it? And again, it's like, is it a warning? Is it a reflection trying to teach you something? Or are you really supposed to, remind somebody? But I can't think of, I don't know. I just can't imagine what it would be like to know that something bad was going to happen to somebody and then struggle with telling them like, oh, you're going to fall off this ladder and pass away. Because as a person who is getting on the ladder, it's like, I would be absolutely terrified if somebody said that. And I'd be like, I don't know, are you crazy? But I don't know, I feel like somebody told me a story once where they saw a man that was gonna climb on top, or she saw a vision or something of a guy climbing up a ladder and then falling off and breaking his neck, and then she said it came true. So I'm not sure if that is true or not, and if that person made that up or if that really happened. So I don't know. I will admit that I don't really know what to make of those types of situations. I'm mostly talking about, the everyday average person who has these dreams, which are very common. And one of the reasons why these doomsday dreams are very common is because you got to remember that we've been flooding our subconscious mind with this imagery since the 1940s, since the Roswell crash, since it was, wrong to talk about UFOs. And humanity has kind of been collectively preparing for some kind of alien invasion. Like if you ask most Americans, most of us believe in aliens. And then also biblical literature and end time prophecies, that's been in the Bible, and people have been talking about that forever too. So if it's in our subconscious, if they're making movies about it, if we're absorbing these movies about it, talking to our friends about it, why would you think that you wouldn't have dreams about that? It's just a matter of time before you have some kind of dream like that. But to walk around, when we start walking around and saying that they're prophetic, not only are we trying to position ourselves in this place where we're a god, so it can often have to do with spiritual ego, wanting to feel special, wanting to feel like we're able to tap into something that not everybody can, wanting to believe that our abilities are special and different. So again, all spiritual ego. And also, if we're not fully, where am I going with this? Like able to integrate that experience ourselves. So it can also be for a lot of people who have their own underlying trauma that they haven't worked with, then they start having these dreams that feel prophetic and feel real. And it can also be a form of escapism. So not only putting yourself up on the platter or on the pedestal for other people to worship, because you need validation from other people. So starting your whole social media page and movement, kind of like the RaptureTok thing, where people, kept making predictions for the end of the world and it kept not happening, but they're probably getting so much power and validation from all these people who were citing along with them, like, yeah, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And it's like a way to bring people together. So apocalyptic dreams are also a way to seemingly bring people together. And again, you're either going to be the mindless sheep that follows those people, because if you don't recognize that you have the same access to the quantum field that they do, and you also have control over your energy body, you also have control over your emotions and the timeline with which you personally align. So if you're not in control of any of that, you are using substances and you're under the control of that, you're being mind controlled by the substances, anything that you need to do every single day is something that has control over you. And when you're under that kind of influence of something, then you can also be easily swept away by these fanatical claims, which may mean good and not harm. Maybe a lot of these people are naive and they're just enjoying the attention they get by sharing it. But they're also blindly following people who are not healed, who still have trauma, who, have the wrong reasons for sharing these things with the collective. And the people who are sharing the collective doomsday dreams for the wrong reason also are being, mind controlled by their own needs for greed and validation. So it can be a very dangerous thing when we start walking around claiming that just because we've had these dreams, it automatically means that the end of the world is coming and blah, blah. I would ask you, if you've ever had this kind of dream, to start asking yourself more questions. Okay, maybe it is true. Maybe something like that is going to happen. But what am I going to do? Am I going to get on the internet and tell everybody doomsday is coming, prepare? Or am I going to say, well, maybe it is a warning. Maybe this is an outcome that's possible if we don't clean our act up. Maybe instead of spreading fear, I'll choose to lean in the vibration of hope. Maybe I will get up off my lazy butt and stop being a keyboard warrior and go take a walk in the woods, or literally go sign up and volunteer to do something, to go plant some trees, to go clean up some trash, to go work with some kids in foster system who don't have loving parents to go rescue dogs that have been abandoned and abused. Like, there's so many ways that you can help people that don't involve scaring people or positioning yourself as some kind of modern day god or prophet. So what else? Yeah, and then I think I already covered the point that the other reason we could have prophetic dreams, again, is just because we're exposed to that literature. So it's only a matter of time before we start having those dreams and experiences ourselves. But all of this to say, at the end of the day, I always go back to what I started talking about in the beginning, this idea that many great minds of our generation talk about again and again, but in different ways. The greatest teachers teach us that you are a sovereign being, and you have the power, like I said, to control your emotions and control your own habits and control your own belief systems. And they don't want you to know that, because when you know that, you start to become a threat to the system. And now, since we're talking about the system again, let me close it with this: the future of dreams. This is what I want to talk about, because I find this very interesting, that the government's interest in our dream state did not stop with the gateway tapes, did not stop with Tavistock Institute, did not stop there. Apparently in 2023, 2024, 2025, which is ironically when a lot of people in the spiritual community started noticing astral attacks and spiritual attacks on the astral plane, like they're having bad dreams, or being attacked in their dream states. The military just funded a lot of dream research, mainly for soldiers suffering with PTSD, but they were studying and funding research that had to do with lucid dreaming. And I believe in the study I read, I want to believe, I think they also mentioned definitely MDMA, and then I thought they mentioned LSD too. So basically, I mean, you already know, it's no secret that there's definitely an interest in psychedelics, which is another way to connect us to the template of reality, or the astral realm. But the other thing I've talked about on my channel too, that is so important for people to wake up and remember, is that these are tools designed to connect you there like one time so you can learn what you need to learn, not to be used every day. And it's dangerous. It seems very dangerous and irresponsible to me when people start to go overboard with psychedelics and start kind of putting them on this pedestal like they're the end all be all, like microdosing, okay? On one hand, it might help victims and it might feel like a good thing, but it's also microdosing you every day to continue to make your mind malleable and primed for mind control. So beware of what these things are funding. So look at where the money's going. So they're funding more psychedelics, more opportunities for people to dissociate, and they want to influence your dream state now. So lucid dreams. And the other thing, the other kicker, is that it's either Japan or China, neuroscientists over there were using EEG monitors and I believe MRI machines on a group of volunteers, and they would hook them up to an MRI machine when they were sleeping, and the EEG, which is reading their brain waves, and then they'd wake them up during REM cycles and ask them to remember their dreams and what they were just dreaming about. And their goal with that study was to connect the brain waves that they captured with the things that those people told them that they had dreamt about, and then asking AI to record their dreams. And they've been able to do that with 60 to 70% accuracy. So again, I'm asking myself, maybe you're asking yourself too, why the interest in controlling and recording our dreams? Is it innocent enough? Is it just so people can remember their dreams, or is it another way to control what we're dreaming about? And to also see what other people are dreaming about. Because another thing to consider is that, perhaps there are people on this planet who believe that if you see certain things in the dream world, then you have access to world events that are going to happen. And to me, this is just a simple misunderstanding of what the dream world is and what the dream realm, the dream world is. And to me, I could be wrong, but to me, it seems like it is the collective unconscious that all of these people talk about, all these great minds talk about, the collective field, which we sync to based on our emotional output. And anyone can link there and go there when we meditate. So when we put our own brainwaves in there, we can align to that frequency. So in a way, anyone that is disciplining their mind and treating their body like a temple. Okay, airplanes, let's wait till they pass. Oh, they're so loud. Can you guys hear that? Okay. So anyone who can discipline their mind by watching the content they consume, by recognizing how content affects their personal belief systems, anyone who can discipline their mind to take control of their belief systems and recognize that they can choose what they believe in so they can create more empowering beliefs for themselves, anyone who can discipline their body and the control of what they eat, what they consume. So not only the content, but also, am I going to eat living foods filled that fuel my body in a healthy way, or am I going to drag myself down with chemicals and pesticides and things that make me feel sleepy and groggy and that literally affect the stress hormones in my body, my adrenal glands, and my brainwaves, right? So if you're disciplined, if you have a clean vessel and healthy habits, and then you try to meditate, if you try to fast for 3 days, holy crap, the kind of spiritual visions that you can have are amazing, because when you're fasting for those 3 days, you're fasting from chemicals and synthetics, and you're putting your body and your brain in a state where you can receive higher spiritual guidance. But again, anyone can have the power to do this. So we have to kind of check our ego with it. And I know that when we're starting to wake up to these experiences on the astral, it can be very exciting, and we can think like, I am a prophet, like I am really special, because not everybody can do this. So I'm not here to, shoot anyone down or tear anyone down, but I'm just saying that I've seen people build whole entire fantasy worlds off this stuff, and the effects that it may have on people who are still under forms of mind control can be devastating. And I think if you're watching this channel, you probably care about the future of the world like me. Like, we want to empower people to think for themselves. We want to focus our energy on the positive timelines. We don't want to put our energy into war and violence and destruction. We want to put our energy into building systems that work for everyone. We want to put our energy into creating an abundant future. We want to put our energy into creating a version of Earth that is healed, where we respect animals, where we don't have to worry if our food is going to be filled with birth control and unhealthy chemicals. So if that sounds appealing to you, I just made a meditation that I posted yesterday under the full moon. It is a Co-Create New Earth meditation, and it's 20-minute long meditation that you can listen to as many times as you want, come back to it as many times as you want, but it's a way for us to collectively envision a positive future with clean water. It is our birthright to have clear water. I'm tired of worrying about my tap water being dirty, if there's birth control in it, if there is pharmaceutical medicines in it. They've already come out to say that this stuff is dirty. Same with food and vegetables, and even organic fruit and vegetables being attacked. So my meditation was designed to allow not only myself and teach myself how to tap into the vibration of a planet where all these things are healed and we're healing together, but I wanted to invite other people to join me. So the power of our thoughts and our intentions, we can start putting some good in the collective quantum field, rather than what Hollywood has put in there about aliens all being evil, and then the other people who don't know any better on the internet who are starting their own groups of people to influence, where they want to have all this attention on them because they're talking about doomsday dreams and stuff. So what side of the world do you want to be on. Would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? That's something I ask myself. Like, I've had prophetic dreams too, and I say that with air quotations because as real as it felt and as real as it could be, it might come true someday. I'm not going to put my energy into telling everybody about it and talking about it with conviction like it's absolutely going to come true. And I'm not going to spend my time and energy thinking about those dreams just because it felt real in a dream. I'm going to know and acknowledge that I had the dream and then ask myself, well, what was it trying to tell me? It was obviously trying to teach me something, to show me something. And hopefully the point of seeing those things in my dreams was to inspire me into action. So how can I put good into the world? How can I inspire others? How can I inspire myself? How can I get up and move every day and be in these higher brainwave states so I can download the higher consciousness information from the quantum field rather than my low vibe NPC former self who was hopelessly addicted to alcohol and male attention and other people's validation and all those things. So if you need help with overcoming any of those habits within yourself, I do have a 21-day habits tracker and belief exploration worksheet, but it's something that you have to commit to every day, and you're not going to get the results, probably won't get the results if you don't commit to doing these things every day. So I just wanted to throw out that disclaimer. And then also I do astrology, human design, and one-on-one tarot sessions. I don't do counseling or anything like that because I'm not a therapist, but my readings are all designed to deliver information that you can sit with, that you can absorb, that you can process on your own. They helped me, so that is my goal, to share those tools with you guys because I believe it will help you too. So thanks for watching. I will see you guys in the next one.